You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, this is an episode that we've been wanting to do for a while. Brad has been in a mastermind group with Harry, the Rideshare Guy from the rideshareguy.com for over the last, I don't know, two plus years at this point. And if Brad is referencing one person to me that is just blowing his mind with all these different ideas, it is Harry. And so it took us close to 18 months now, but we're having him on the show, and he is going to be helping us explore both how to optimize specifically the rideshare services like Uber and Lyft, but then expanding that out to the rogue entrepreneur. And I think this conversation is just going to be so much fun. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing great. And yeah, as you alluded to, Harry is just a guy that I personally look up to as far as just the entire entrepreneurial sphere. He is just rocking it on every level. His site, therideshareguy.com, is the leader in the entire ride sharing industry. And he just has built an amazing business with financial independence as the background. He is from the FI world. I think we could go any number of ways with this interview, and it's just going to be a really, really good time. So with that, Harry, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for that amazing intro, and hopefully I can live up to everyone's high expectations.
Yeah, well, me too. We threw the bar out there, and just we'll watch you strive to reach it for the rest of the episode.
Perfect. I'm ready.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into this, man. And before we do it, like Brad set up the context, you're in the FI community. What does that mean for you specifically? How did you find out about financial independence, and what has that meant for some of the decisions that you've made over the last several years?
Yeah, no, that's a great starting point because, I mean, I actually really got into personal finance in general back in 2009 when I graduated college. I started working as an aerospace engineer, and, I was making a decent starting salary for an engineer, but honestly, I didn't know a ton about finance, especially the nitty-gritty stuff like investing and where to put my money and what to do with it. So I really just started researching, and I stumbled upon a lot of personal finance blogs in the early days. And this was a little bit before the whole FI movement. So I was finding blogs, there are more like the Oblivious Investor and the Finance Buff, which some of your listeners may be familiar with. And at a certain point, I thought to myself, hey, maybe I'll start documenting my journey. So I started a personal finance blog of my own. And it was really more for fun, but that was kind of what led me down the path of really thinking about I've always been a side hustler and I've always been looking to make money and save money, but really kind of looking at it more holistically and putting everything together. That's kind of what started me on my journey.
And Harry, that personal finance blog, did that really light the fire of this entrepreneurial spirit that you have? Did it predate that? Did you have other side hustles? Talk us through like the inception of Harry, the side hustler.
So you know what? I think the best way to put it is I've always liked making money, but I've always sort of gravitated to kind of what I call high return on investment type hustles or jobs. I mean, I could go through a whole laundry list, but maybe that's
no. Let's go through the laundry list. That's exactly what we want to do. Let's go through all of them.
Perfect. And I'm actually going to start with a good one because in college, I literally was the laundry boy for my volleyball team, and at the end of we had practice every day, and at the end, everyone had a mesh bag that they would throw all of their dirty clothes into, and I would come swoop them up and throw them in the industrial washer that they had behind the gym. I would get paid for 2 hours every day. It was only $15 an hour, but all the teams had to use this washer and dryer, and there was sort of this unwritten or unspoken code that we would all help each other out, right? So I would just drop it off in the washer, and the next person that came along would move it to the dryer, and they would put their stuff in the washer. So I was getting paid for 2 hours every day for maybe 5 minutes of work. The next morning, I'd go pick it up and throw it in a big bag and dump it on the floor. No folding, nothing like that. And, it's $30 a day, not a ton of money, but I think when you think about the time, 5 minutes, it was an awesome return right there.
All right, so I don't want to go to the end of the story because I actually do want to get the full on list, but I do want to point out that you're just looking at things a little bit differently, and you're looking for these, I guess Brad would call it outliers, these places where you can get outsized results for less effort. And that's an incredible theme that I think is going to carry us through this entire conversation, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that it wasn't necessarily a strategy I had. I think it was something that maybe I just got a little lucky to, that I gravitated towards. I mean, I've done everything from coaching volleyball, which was definitely a bigger time commitment, but I would have done that job for free because it was so much fun coaching volleyball. And I think I got paid around $1,000 a month in college to do that one. In high school, I remember my first job ever when I was 14. Before I think you were legally allowed to work, I somehow got a job where I was a chat room monitor for this company called Jester Digital that is obviously no longer around, and no one actually used this service. So I was online every day for 2 or 3 hours getting paid to basically do my homework. And another job that I had in high school, I worked for a company called the Princeton Review, which was a test prep company that's still around, I think still doing pretty well. And, I got paid probably $12 an hour to do a bunch of stuff around the office and filing. But the bonus was that I got free SAT tutoring for math and English and all of that, which I know at the time was worth thousands of dollars. I'm sure at this point it's more. I probably wouldn't have been able to afford it on my own. But I guess I've always sort of just looked for, kind of those types of jobs and those types of hustles. And it's definitely translated into bigger and better the older I've gotten.
So that our audience is always looking for actionable tips. And other than the clothes washing during college with the volleyball team, do you have any other hacks or tips from your college experience that could be relatable to the audience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that sometimes it's just about doing things that, maybe on the surface, like if you went and you might not apply to go and do a laundry job, for example, right? But if you start doing it and you realize that it's only 5 minutes a day, it sounds pretty good at that point, right? But of course, as you can imagine, no one really advertises that. In college, I was also I believe they called them graders. So I wasn't a TA, but I graded papers. And the teacher that I ended up working for, he only assigned one homework every few weeks. And there were 3 of us grading. So I only had to grade one homework for, I think, the entire 12-week or, 1 or 2 homeworks for the entire 10-week quarter. And I still got paid every week. And that was actually pretty decent pay. So I think sometimes it's just about looking at things on the surface. And even though it may not seem appealing on the surface, like what's the harm in trying or what's the harm in doing something? Because, if a lot of people aren't willing to do it, sometimes you can kind of stand out or put yourself in a position where you're just trying new things and looking at opportunities. And it may not always be for the, what's on the surface, is actually what it's like in real life.
So Harry, you said aerospace engineer, right?
Yeah. That's like a rocket scientist, right? Is that a stretch?
So I did intern one summer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. So I guess for one summer, I was sort of technically a rocket scientist, but, I can definitely tell you the work that I was doing there was not that complex.
That presumably is a fairly high-paying career or ultimately can be. And
yeah.
Now you've turned into the rideshare guy. But obviously there's a lot between here and there. Did you pick that major because of interest? Did you pick it in some regard because of potential earnings? Did you pick your college in particular because it had aerospace engineering as an option? Give me some background on that.
Yeah, these are all actually really great questions. I feel like I'm learning a lot about myself right now, to be honest, because the more you dig, I'm starting to see some patterns too, the more I talk. And definitely, I grew up in Los Angeles. And so really my main choice for college, I wanted to go somewhere that wasn't LA. So I applied to UC San Diego, got in, and, just seemed like a great place, heard that it was a good school. And so I went in and I knew that I liked math and science. And I remember actually when I was applying to UCSD, I picked my major as mechanical and aerospace engineering just because I said, hey, you know what? I like planes. That seems like it was aerospace engineering, not mechanical. But it seemed like just something that would be kind of cool. So I actually went into UCSD having already picked aerospace engineering as my major. And I figured that I could always switch. And I think really the main factors in that was that I was kind of interested in math and science. I don't honestly remember if I have a feeling that I knew that engineers got paid pretty decently, but it probably wasn't my biggest motivating factor.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So talk us through now, you're a college graduate. Do you have any student loan debt? What do your first couple of years look like as far as like your own personal finances look like once you got out into the real world?
Yeah, so I was lucky because my dad actually claimed me as, I guess, a dependent when I was going through college. And my dad has always been semi-retired, kind of working from home. And he's actually a bassoon repairman. So I'm sure that a lot of his income is cash. So basically, he didn't have a lot of taxable income. And so I got a pretty decent amount of, I guess they just call it straight financial need-based aid. And then I also remember I applied for a ton of scholarships that were, kind of a cool thing I remember in college that they had. A lot of people apply to scholarships when they're going into college or before they go to college. But I remember I found that there were a bunch of scholarships at UC San Diego sort of affiliated with the financial aid. I think I won a scholarship called the Malcolm R. Stacy, who I have no idea who this guy is, but basically they gave me $1,000 every quarter just for applying for these scholarships. So I always felt like that was a cool little tip right there. I worked all throughout college. I had a bunch of different jobs. So I was saving money and, because I think the financial based aid paid for about half of it. I graduated UC San Diego with about $20,000 in debt. And luckily, my mom paid off all of that debt for me. So I definitely have to thank my parents because coming out of college, I had no debt. I had a bunch of money saved up because I had been working in college and I got a job right in San Diego as soon as I graduated. And I believe my starting salary was $57,500. I don't know why I remember that, but I'm pretty sure. I'm like 95% sure that was my starting salary.
Can we go back to the part where you say that your dad has a lifestyle by design, semi-retired bassoon repairman, which I'm assuming is something that he's passionate about? Why are we even talking to you at this point?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, my dad may make for a great interview for you because he's lived a really good life, I feel like. So he went to USC and he was in the marching band. So he's always been a musician. When he graduated at college, I know he did some odd jobs, some construction and things like that before becoming a professional bassoonist, I guess is what it's called. He played in St. Louis Orchestra, Mexico City Philharmonic. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology. Someone who's a music buff.
Well, he'll probably correct you at the family dinner, but we'll just let it slide.
Yeah, but basically he was a professional bassoonist, I think is what you call it, and played all around and kind of semi-retired. But, I think along the way, he was doing things in real estate and he was working construction. I know even at one point it's sort of like your parents. You don't know exactly what they did when you weren't born, but I know he did a lot. And so by the time I was born, he was actually basically a stay-at-home dad. And, even to this day, he still works at home and does bassoon repair. And I think he's one of the only people in all of Los Angeles that does it. I mean, there's not a ton of bassoons floating around here, but he does have that market cornered, I think.
Wow, what an amazing backstory. And basically, it kind of almost indicates that you are the prototypical second generation Phi.
Wow, that is really cool.
Definitely.
A follow-up episode for sure.
Well, we keep building the queue out, Brad. We're going to have episodes through the end of 2020. Having said all that and set the stage, I kind of want to go deeper into the scholarship messaging that you were just talking about. You said, I got this very specific package. I knew not to just look inside the box, but to see what else was available to stack onto this. And I'm just curious for our audience that's listening to that, what's the takeaway? Is it just that it was financial aid based, or was there anything else you did to separate yourself? So when they're picking the one winner of the scholarship, they went with you over student B.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember actually that there were a list of scholarships that you could apply for. And of course, these are ones that were sort of offered by my college, right? UC San Diego. And so they had some that were in honor of certain alumni, and they had some that were, if you were a specific ethnic heritage, right? And so basically, I just looked for anything and everything that kind of remotely applied to me. I'll be honest, I was probably a little extra aggressive. I mean, I'm half Asian, so I'm sure that I applied for all of the Asian-based scholarships. I was an engineer. So I remember specifically that there were a couple engineering scholarships. And, I bet if it had the word engineer in there, whether it was electrical or chemical, I probably applied for it regardless. And then I know that there was one that you had to submit an essay. And so I remember writing a short 1-page or less essay for this scholarship. And I think for me, it sort of goes back to I'm always looking, what can I do? I bet a lot of people look at an application for a scholarship and they see, oh, it requires an essay. And I bet that knocks out a lot of people. And so for me, I'm not going to go and spend a ton of time working on an essay, but I do want to think about, all right, what can I do that maybe 70 or 80 or even 90% of people aren't willing to do? Maybe 80% of people aren't willing to do even just a half a page essay. So I'm going to at least give myself a chance with a half a page essay. Maybe it only takes an hour, but now I can stand out over 70, 80% of people.
Do you remember that essay?
I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure that it was less than a page.
That's cool, though. That's the 80-20 principle, right? You're not applying for $100,000 scholarship that a million other kids from across the country are applying for. You're looking for very targeted ones that, let's say, like you said, 80 to 90% of people just aren't applying for it just because they don't meet the requirements. And then you spend an hour or two, right, writing an essay. There's return on investment on there, obviously. Like that's just a good bet from just that sheer mathematical perspective. I love that, Harry.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of my, you can probably tell that I definitely used to be an engineer, right? Because I'm always kind of thinking about things in those terms. I mean, even when I remember the other day when I was at an ice cream shop and you could fill out your email to save, 75 cents on your ice cream. And so I literally wrote my email. It took 5 seconds to write my email down and drop it in the box. I saved 75 cents. I look over and my wife is just staring at me like, why did you just do that? And I was thinking to myself, well, 75 cents times 12, that's my per minute rate, times 60 would be my hourly rate. I think that's like hundreds of dollars per hour that I just made, even though it's only a 75 cent savings, right?
I'm pretty sure Brad does that.
Oh yeah. Kindred spirits here, Harry. I love it.
So you're an aerospace engineer. You've got the dream job working with Boeing. Like, why does the story not just finish here? I mean, this is it. You've got your 30 to 40 year career with a tried and true company that's absolutely stable and it's not going anywhere. You write your own ticket. For 99.9% of the population, this is what it looks like, but not you. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I would sort of stop you right there. I don't know that it was my dream job. I mean, it was definitely something that I enjoyed, and it was definitely something where I was making good money. By the time I was at Boeing, I had 5 or 6 years experience, had gotten 1 or 2 raises. So, I probably wasn't making 6 figures yet, but I was definitely close with the all-in compensation. Lunch breaks were very easy. I remember I was playing basketball at lunch on the Boeing campus, and, I had a good workload, but it wasn't intense where I was staying till 7 or 8 p.m. every night. So it was definitely a good job. But I think I looked around the office and, it wasn't a sudden epiphany at Boeing. I think it was over my time as an engineer is, from meeting a lot of these people. I remember, at Boeing, there was a guy sitting across from me who literally worked in that same building 30 years ago for a different company. And, I think just looking around and seeing these guys who, they were all doing it, but they were complaining every Monday morning when they came in. And I was thinking to myself, I probably am not going to be able to do this job for 30, 40 years. I just don't understand why anyone would want to do something that they hate or that they dislike when there's so many opportunities out there if you're looking. And I think that's really the stage of my life that I was in. I was content. I was happy. I could have probably done it for many more years, but I knew that there had to be something better. And so I was just really constantly looking for other opportunities. A lot of that was working online and, basing things off of my first online business, my personal finance blog, just looking for opportunities there. And that's kind of how I stumbled upon the Uber and Lyft stuff.
So Harry, I'm curious, was meeting these coworkers, I guess, who had been there for decades or who were disgruntled on every Monday morning, was that the impetus to get you into the FI world and side hustles? Where do you think that really came from? I'm curious about that point where you said, all right, this is not something I'm doing for decades. I need to figure this out. Was it a dual-pronged strategy of cut my expenses, get to FI, and or getting the side hustles in? Where did you fall down on that continuum?
Yeah, so I think I have a pretty good answer for that because there definitely wasn't a specific point where I sat down and said to myself, I'm not going to be able to do this for 20, 30, 40 years, right? I think it was more the general feeling that I had. And I knew to myself, I knew that I wouldn't be able to do this forever and that I needed to, at some point, kind of figure something better out. But I wasn't in a rush to do it because, like I said, honestly, I mean, I think that working as an engineer or at a job, I was doing everything that I wanted to do. I had vacation. I was taking vacation. Obviously, I had to come into an office every day. But at the same time, I think I was still living a very good life. I was in Southern California, had a bunch of friends and family nearby, was making good money. I had purchased a condo, so I sort of had everything that someone might want. But I also, at the same time, I just didn't think it was sustainable. And I think that was the biggest kind of motivating factor for me is that, it wasn't that I have to figure something out in the next year. It was that, at some point in the future, I need to figure something out that's going to make me more challenge me more, make me more interested, make me more passionate. I think that's the best way to describe it. I wasn't passionate about my job and, I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't be. So,
you talked about how you were willing to start a side hustle and you initially started a personal finance blog, but we're not really talking about the personal finance blog today. You're not a personal finance guy necessarily, but you are the rideshare guy. And I just want to know, like, let's talk about that pivot. What even got you interested in this idea of rideshare? What sort of impact did Uber and Lyft have on your life? How did it play into this kind of lifestyle by design strategy of yours?
Yeah, so I mean, I first heard about Uber and Lyft as a passenger. I was taking it at the time. I was living in Newport Beach in Orange County, California, and I was taking it as a passenger here and there. And one day I talked to a driver. You guys will actually like this story. When Lyft first launched in Orange County, they were paying drivers just to be online, available for rides. But, while they were growing their passenger base, there weren't a ton of rides. So this driver I talked to told me he was getting paid, I think, $24 an hour just to sit there at home and watch Netflix. He was doing maybe one ride a day and getting paid $24 an hour. And so you guys know what I was thinking at that point. Oh, sign me up, right? I would love to work and, not work and get paid. So I sort of signed up basically that same day to drive with Lyft. And, by the time I actually got signed up and started doing rides, that promotion was over. But it was just funny that was kind of the impetus for getting me signed up for Uber and Lyft, is the ability to get paid and not work.
Well, let's go into this specifically. I'm very curious, and I would even say I'm a little bit cynical on on some of these rideshare programs. Just that's my own potential bias, just because I had a brother that tried to do it and didn't really, he didn't really make a lot of money doing it. He tried to buy a new car, and just, the economics of that whole thing just got out of hand. But if someone was to follow your advice, in 2018, what is the play for someone that is looking at Uber or Lyft as a viable side hustle?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the best way to put it is Uber and Lyft are not going to make you rich, but it can definitely be a great temporary situation. It can make you a few bucks here and there, and it can be fun. So I think when you look at it with that mentality as a true side hustle, you're going to sort of set yourself up for the best chance at success. Now, the unique thing is that unlike a regular job, let's say you want to go work at Starbucks, or let's say you want to go work, even a corporate job, right? There's a ton of variability, right, with driving for Uber and Lyft. Depending on what city you're in, if you're in a bigger city like LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, right off the bat, demand is way higher there. So you're gonna be able to make more money there. Now, the other thing is the times and the places that you drive. If you drive Friday, Saturday night when people are out and it's busy and demand again is super high and surge pricing is out, you're gonna make more money. And the third thing that makes it even more complicated and it kind of adds to that variability is the expense side of things. All Uber and Lyft drivers are actually not only responsible, obviously, for their income, but also their expenses. So you have to pay for gas, you have to pay for depreciation. So it does matter what type of car you're driving if you're really looking to maximize your profits.
So how does the person, like yourself, that's looking at this now with that construct that you just set up for us, if you're going to do this and it's going to be viable, how are you looking at the tax end of things to really optimize that? And then also, how are you using those limitations that you put, the time, the surge, everything else? Sure. How are you using that to maximize your profit? And then in a perfect scenario, what is that looking like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's important to set the realistic expectations first. So earlier in the year, we surveyed 1,100 drivers, and they reported making about $16 to $17 an hour before expenses. Expenses might run you about $3 to $5 per hour. So most drivers are making $10 to $15 an hour on average, which is not a ton of money. But like I said, there's a ton of variability there. So if you're in a bigger city like a San Francisco or LA, right off the bat, the average goes up by $5 an hour. We also found that, drivers with more experience, so the more trips you do, the smarter you are, the savvy you are, your income goes up again. I mean, that's sort of what my whole business is predicated on, that, the better driver you are, the more money you make. So I was sort of glad to see that. But, so you kind of have an idea of, a ballpark of what the earnings are going to be. And I think from there, the nice thing is that there is a very low barrier to entry. If you have a smartphone and an eligible vehicle, and that could be 2002 or newer in a lot of cities, you can get started and you can literally try it out and just see if it works for you. Unlike other businesses that might require investment, time, money, even setting up a website. I mean, that might take you a full Saturday. You can get approved for Uber and Lyft from your couch and be driving within a few days. So I think I like that aspect that, it's easy to try. And definitely that's one thing we hear from a lot of new drivers is that, they like that it's so easy to get online and onboarded quickly.
So Harry, I'm always looking for these little tidbits. First, I want to say, it's great that you set the expectations. I think that is really important. Like if someone thinks they're going to come in and make a full-time salary at this, probably fairly unlikely, especially at that net of $10 to $12 an hour, or roughly what you quoted. So, but that
Although
said,
I will say, we can definitely get into it. I will say that it is possible if you're if all the stars align. I mean, we have, one of my contributors, he actually made $2,800 last week driving Lyft in San Francisco. So it sort of shows you that there really is the range of, from high to low. There's drivers who are making less than minimum wage. So sorry to interrupt you, but definitely there's a lot
that's
of
great.
variability.
And that actually ties into my question, which is, you said a quote, the better driver you are, the more you make. I'm looking for those couple little hacks that someone listening to this can shortcut all those hundreds of hours of driving and not making that kind of money per hour. What are a couple things that you could pass along that would help someone kind of bump up their hourly rate?
Sure. I mean, I have a couple specific things that they can do, and then just sort of my general advice that I think would be super helpful for someone that's looking into this. And I mean, I think the first thing is, even in my new book, The Rideshare Guide, I talk about, following the alcohol, right? Especially when it comes to Uber and Lyft. You want to go where the rides are, and people are typically taking Uber and Lyft, times of high demand are Friday, Saturday nights when people are drinking. So, let's say you're the type of person, you don't need to go out to the bars Friday, Saturday night, or on July 4th, you don't mind working a few hours in the morning, whatever works with your schedule. You can always find these times of very high demand, and that's typically where you can go in and make the most amount of money. So that is kind of my number one tip for a lot of drivers, is to really kind of look at those times of high demand. But I think also in general, the overall strategy and really the mindset that you have to come with is that sometimes you have to remember, as an Uber or Lyft driver, really anyone in the gig economy, you're running your own business, and running your own business can be tough. It can be a little cutthroat at times. And I think kind of understanding that being a savvy driver, not every passenger, not every trip, and not every area of town is going to be profitable, and understanding that income and expense side of things, that kind of mindset, I think, is what ends up benefiting a lot of drivers, getting them to that upper echelon.
Is the upper range kind of, you can make up to like $50 or $60 an hour if all the stars align? Is that kind of like where this range is?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the upper echelon is probably that $30 to $40 an hour range. And that's going to be in the bigger cities like San Francisco and even some in LA. It's going to be tough, if you're out in the middle of the country where it's not as busy, to get that no matter what you do. But I think that definitely is on the table. And, one thing I kind of forgot to mention that is pretty important too is the flexibility of driving for Uber and Lyft. And, when we survey drivers, when we talk to drivers, that's the thing that comes up over and over. The two things they care most about is pay. Obviously, everyone cares about how much money they're making, how much money they're saving, and then also the flexibility. And I don't think most people realize just how flexible driving for Uber is. I would say regardless of sort of your situation. And again, I'm a little biased because I want everyone to drive for Uber and Lyft, but they have, today, for example, I could go out and drive 5 hours for Uber. Let's say I only make $65. I can cash out that money instantly to my bank account, and it can be there within 20 minutes. So I think that when you combine the scheduling flexibility with Uber, literally you can work whenever and wherever you want for as long or as short as you want, and also cash that money out instantly. It's sort of like just a good backup plan to have. And I feel like it fits well into that sort of theme of being financially independent and, having something as a backup where, hey, this may not pay your rent, but if you want to go out for a night on the town and you don't want to cut into your savings, go drive for Uber for a few hours, make the money to pay for your dinner, and then you're done.
Harry, in light of that flexibility, so let's say I'm a regular suburban office worker and I have, let's say, a 20 or 30-minute commute. And in a perfect world, I'd love to make a couple extra bucks on my way, and who knows, maybe meet someone in my area that I could talk to for 20 minutes. Is there any way that someone can kind of build that in as a rideshare driver, that kind of specific, like, of course, going out of your way a couple minutes, et cetera, but like, is that doable to just say like, all right, this is my route, maybe I can pick someone up roughly on this route?
Yeah. And so, I mean, honestly, that situation you described just now is literally what Uber and Lyft are perfect for. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I love going and talking to audiences like yours, because I feel like there are a ton of people in your audience who are going to fit that profile and don't know all the benefits. Most people honestly don't use Uber and Lyft for what you just described. They use it because they need to make money. And I think that there's so many ancillary benefits of driving for Uber and Lyft. It's the conversations you have, the practice at running your own business, making a few bucks on your way to or from work. So Uber and Lyft both have this feature called destination filter. So what that allows you to do as a driver is when you're leaving your house, and so we might be able to link to this in the show notes. I did a big experiment where I basically everywhere I went in LA, I used the destination filter for about 3 months straight and kind of calculated my hourly earnings and all of that. But basically what happens is, let's say I'm at my house, I turn the destination filter on to go to work. And I can also set a time that I need to be there at work by, right? Within reason, right? So if it's 30 minutes away, you can usually set an hour timer, right? Double the time. So you do need to have a little bit of flexibility. If you have to be there right at 8 a.m., it may not work as well. But if you have some flexibility, it'll work. And Uber will now only send you ride requests headed in that direction. So what that does is, you're not going to make a ton of money. You might make 15 to 20 bucks on your way to work, but you might only go 15 minutes out of your way, right? And again, thinking about it on that hourly rate, I think when I did this experiment, I was around $30 to $40 an hour. Now, I wasn't making $30 to $40 every time I went out and did this, but I might only do one trip and it might take me 4 minutes out of my way. The other cool thing is that, now all of these miles are deductible, right? Because when you're driving for Uber and Lyft, you're an independent contractor, all these miles are deductible as an Uber and Lyft driver. So you can actually offset a lot of that income. So if you can make $30 an hour doing this, and you can offset all of that income. And let's say you're a high wage earner, making $150,000 a year and your marginal tax bracket is 30 or 40%. Now you see that $30 an hour is actually even more. It might be, $50 an hour, when you think about it compared to your day job. So there's lots of really cool little tips and tricks and kind of hacks like that I think, if people knew a little bit more about driving for Uber and Lyft, they may be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, Harry, that is a huge takeaway. I absolutely love that. And I hope everybody really listen intently, because that's something that people legitimately could do just as part of their normal lives.
Yeah, it really doesn't even include all of the fringe benefits that I like to refer to. I work from home, so I like talking to people. I like having interesting conversations. I read up on the news. I like different topics, and I've had some amazing conversations with passengers. I had a lawyer in my car a few weeks ago for 30 minutes, and I basically just peppered him with business questions and got a bunch of free legal advice. So that was kind of cool. And, I've even had friends who have met their significant other driving for Uber. So, it literally ranges the gamut there, and it's kind of cool.
That's amazing. So you are still driving for Uber and Lyft, right? That's what you just alluded to. And I kind of want to get into that. So you were an aerospace engineer and you were moonlighting essentially as a rideshare driver. That predated you starting the website. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. That's how that's kind of what inspired me to start the Rideshare Guy, the website. But, I was working for Boeing, like we talked about, and I started driving for Uber and Lyft. And it was pretty much, my wife was in med school at the time, so I had a lot of free time. And Friday, Saturday nights, instead of going out to the bars, I was driving for Uber and driving for Lyft. And, these services were new. And I think definitely the trend that we see in the gig economy is that when these services are new or when they're first launching, they definitely pay more. So I was making pretty good money, usually $30 to $40 an hour, which is probably not nearly, it's not really doable anymore on your typical Friday, Saturday night. But when I first started, I was making more driving for Uber and Lyft just 10 hours a week than I was at my day job. And I think that was definitely, I wouldn't say I got pushback, but a lot of people, I wasn't afraid to say, hey, I'm driving for Uber and Lyft on the side to my coworkers, to my friends, to my family. And I definitely got some funny looks. I definitely got people who were probably thinking, you're an engineer, you don't have to drive for Uber and Lyft. But for me, again, it was something that was a ton of fun, and I was making more than my day job on an hourly basis. So that was pretty cool. These days, I'm running the site full time and running my business full time. I do still go out and drive for Uber and Lyft here and there, try out new services, really kind of to stay up to date on the apps and, see what's going on there though.
I wanted to talk about this a little bit more and dive into it because,
Sure.
You've been featured in Wired Magazine, CNBC, New York Times, Forbes, NPR. Over 50,000 people have subscribed to your email list to just get the latest information. How do you transition from a guy that is just kind of doing this on the side to someone who has basically become the spokesperson for not necessarily representing Uber and Lyft, but the drivers? You are their ambassador. What does that transition look like?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you pointed that out because I definitely enjoy, one of the things I enjoy about my job is kind of representing drivers. And, I wouldn't say that we're an advocacy group. We're definitely sort of content is the product. But as you can imagine, drivers are my audience, and that's really who I care about and try to help. But I think really that transition for me, I started the site, The Rideshare Guy, while I was working at Boeing. And so I was spending probably 20 to 30 hours a week building up the Rideshare Guy, creating content, promoting the content, and especially, at the start, it was all about promoting the content, getting people to read it, building those connections, starting to establish relationships with the media. As you mentioned, I've been very fortunate to be quoted quite a few times in the media and featured and things like that. And, really just a lot of the relationships that I built with those reporters helped big time to kind of grow the site. And, I definitely have to say that one of the nice things about my day job was that, as long as you can get all your work done, no one says anything, if you're kind of, or maybe if they knew, they might, but, I was spending probably at least an hour or two a day, working on my site, responding to comments, checking emails, kind of doing, sort of my blog work while I was at Boeing. Nobody really knew because I was still getting my work done. So that, I really like that strategy of kind of, I had my safe and secure day job, but on the side, I was hustling and I was doing everything I could to kind of grow this site.
Harry, as we said from the outset, you're kind of a business mind that I look up to. So I've always been curious to ask you this question. I don't think I ever have, but I'm curious about the name of the website. I know you're in the miles and points world, and of course you're familiar with the Points Guy. Was that any inspiration for the Rideshare Guy? Is that where it came from? Is part of your success due to the fact that you took this mantle of I'm the rideshare guy, or my website is the rideshare guy? Or do you think part of it is first mover advantage? Were you one of the early sites? Talk me through the name and how you think that has benefited you.
Yeah, so busted, first of all. Definitely, I'm a huge the Points Guy fan, and I would say that right after your guys' podcast, I think the Points Guy is definitely one of my favorite content creators. So I was always reading the Points Guy and, just really more for fun. So when I started my site, definitely drew some inspiration from the Points Guy. But I still remember, when I was thinking about the name for my, my rideshare site, whatever it was going to be called, I wrote down a list of probably 40 or 50 names, the Uber guy, Uber driving, the rideshare guy, rideshare this, rideshare that. And honestly, I didn't put a ton of thought into it. I don't remember why I picked the Rideshare Guy, probably because it sounded like the Points Guy. And, I didn't put a lot of thought into it and I picked it. It has definitely worked out well. I don't think the name is the reason why the site has been so successful, but I can tell you when I meet people in the industry, when I'm talking to people, they always say, hey, look, it's the Rideshare Guy. I don't know if everyone knows my first name. So I definitely think that name, that branding has sort of stuck. And luckily, it's worked out really well for me. But I think for the most part, I think kind of the advantage I had in starting the site was that I had some experience blogging. I wasn't a professional by any stretch, but I kind of knew the gist of, creating some content, writing some blog posts, getting, some basic strategies at promoting it, getting people to link to it. And, I think that's the big thing when people are just starting, they want to write things and then they hope people will come and read it. And I sort of knew that I'm going to spend about half my time writing stuff and I'm going to spend the other half of my time getting people to come in here to see my stuff, to share it with them, to read it. And so I think that there's definitely a little bit, I had an advantage there that I had some experience. And I think the other big thing is that I was definitely one of the first people to do it. So, that has always been a theme in my life. I like being the only one doing something, or I like standing out from the rest of the crowd. And I think that, this wasn't by any super special skill that I, stood out from the crowd. It was just that I happened to start driving for Uber and Lyft when they were small companies, and then they kind of exploded onto the scene. So for that part, I definitely feel very fortunate.
So Harry, Brad and I always, when we're doing these interviews and we have someone that's being willing to just basically show everything they did that worked, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of that individual that's starting out or day one. So forget the fact that you get millions of page views a month at this point, and your site is the center of the Uber Lyft universe for the drivers. That individual starting on day one has maybe not even gotten their first comment on their blog. They have their brand name locked down. What are those actionable tips that you could give to that individual that's just trying to figure out, how do I become the center of, a particular niche or a particular topic for a group, even a small group of 500 to 1,000 people? What does it look like to make that happen?
I mean, I think the first thing that you have to do, probably even before you pen your first, I guess, type your first post, is you have to find something that you're passionate about or that you're interested in. Because creating content online, and I think especially just working for yourself in general, at a certain point, it's going to be a grind. At a certain point, there's going to be a lot of challenges that you're going to face. And I think in order for you to overcome a lot of those challenges, you have to really be passionate, or at a minimum, just be very interested in the topic at hand. And for me with rideshare, I had just learned about Uber and Lyft, but I like tech. I like, all the technology aspect. I thought this new mobility, this rideshare, going actually out and doing it was a cool idea. And it wasn't something that I said, hey, you know what, I'm going to drop everything I'm doing, and this is, what I have to now do for the rest of my life. But I was definitely interested and passionate. And so I know that kind of went a long way. When I started, I'm creating content very consistently. So I started off with 3 blog posts a week. And, even before I ever started my site, I wrote down 50 ideas, of basically article ideas that I would write. So I wanted to make sure that I would have enough content. Going out and driving for Uber and Lyft was definitely a help. And I think that's a nice thing about blogging and creating that sort of personal, what I call, the difference between a blogger and a journalist. A journalist is an expert at being a journalist. They're going to go out and talk to experts, in rideshare. They're going to talk to sources. They're going to interview people. They're going to ask great questions. The nice thing about being a blogger is you don't have to be an expert, at least at the start. A lot of people can empathize with you if you're just getting started. You're trying to figure things out, and they're learning with you along the way. So I think that's really kind of the big things for me when I was first getting started. I was writing content. Everyone was in the same space, right? We were all trying to figure things out. And so I was writing content, that was just very much, kind of me figuring out how to do this, how to make more money. I was an engineer, so I sort of played to my skills of creating spreadsheets, tracking all of my earnings. And I think people found a lot of value in that.
So Harry, actually, you brought up in there about journalists, and you were talking about it in a different sphere, but you've been quoted in major publications on a regular basis. You're a go-to guy for quotes about the ride-sharing industry. How does that come about? Again, that person who's starting their blog on day one, they have maybe 10 page views a month. They're not Harry, the rideshare guy. How do you get from here to there? And how much do these journalists and these connections, how much does that matter?
Yeah. So, I think when you're first getting started, the media side of things, getting quoted and getting featured is obviously attractive, but I don't think it matters a ton at the start. When you're at the 10 page views a month or 10 page views a day, 100 page views a day, there's a lot of organic stuff that you can do. And that's really what I did to grow my site. I was in all of the forums. I was in all the Facebook groups, just helping people, answering their questions, and then maybe sending them a personal message. Hey, I've got, a website that we go into more detail here, right? And I probably just did that thousands of times. I was on all the forums. I was on Reddit. I was basically going where I was finding these groups of drivers, these existing communities, and kind of injecting myself there and trying to provide as much value as possible without being too spammy or seeming too spammy. So, that was really kind of those types of strategies are what I used to grow. And at a certain point, there was an inflection point where I started to realize, hey, I'm reaching hundreds of people a day. I'm reaching maybe 1,000 people a day, but sites like the New York Times, Wired, right, Forbes, these sites are reaching tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Some of them are reaching millions of people a day. So how can I kind of tap into that? How can I leverage that? Again, you can't just write stuff or, sit back and hope the reporters are going to come to you, the reporters are going to find you. And I think that's when you really put yourself in a reporter's shoes. A lot of the reporters I know, they have 2 email addresses, for example. And that's going to be one for people they know and one just sort of their public email for people to pitch them, just to kind of show you the sheer volume of emails that reporters are getting. A lot of them have 2 email addresses. And so for me, it was all about establishing relationships. Now, I had a big advantage because Uber was in the news a ton, and they still are to this day. So it was a very sexy topic, and there were a lot of what I call beat reporters who were anytime Uber did anything, there was a Forbes beat reporter, there's a TechCrunch beat reporter, there was a BuzzFeed beat reporter. And so I started interacting with a lot of them on Twitter. Reporters all love Twitter, so I would start, sharing, favoriting. And what I started doing was weekly roundups. And this is a strategy that people in other industries use. But since I was really one of the only people in rideshare, I stood out because I was featuring every week. I was featuring 4 to 5 of the top Uber and Lyft stories. And then afterwards, I would go out and tweet and say, hey, at Brad, at ChooseFI, we featured your story on Uber last week in our roundup. So now they see my name and, it feels good, right, to be featured, even if if it's on some tiny little blog. And eventually I would reach out to them, email them and say, hey, my name is Harry. I'm a driver for Uber and Lyft. I run this website that helps drivers. If you ever need anything, here's my contact info. Here's my cell phone. You can call me anytime, day or night. And what ended up happening was that a lot of reporters, when they're doing a story on Uber and Lyft, it's nice to have that driver perspective. And they don't want to just have some random driver that could be kind of a loony guy, right? They want to have someone with a little bit of credibility, and having that website attached to my name gave me some credibility. And so that's really kind of how I started with building a lot of those organic relationships, just trying to be a resource, be of value to as many reporters as possible. And slowly that's built up over time. And that's kind of one of the turning points where I was going from getting, a few hundred page views a day to consistently 1,000 page views a day, and then thousands of page views a day.
Holy crap, you mic dropped it. That might be the most valuable 90 seconds for a blogger ever on this particular podcast episode. That's amazing.
Awesome. Well, I've got lots more if you're ready.
No, I'm ready. Let's do it now.
No, I think really, though, the general strategy, it kind of combines a couple things. It's sort of thinking about, all right, reporters, they love Twitter. So I'm taking advantage of that fact. I also know that if I cold reach out to someone, again, right, they have a separate email for pitches. So how many pitches a day do you think they're getting? Hundreds? How many of those people do you think tweet them ahead of time before they email? Before I would email these reporters, I would also say, hey, just sent you an email on Twitter. So now they're getting it from 2 points. I don't know that that's going to work for sure, but I do know that I'm standing out from maybe 80 or 90% of the rest of the people. So it's really about finding those things and kind of understanding, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And that's just a good example, I think, of the strategy I used there.
And Harry, that's the second time you've jumped ahead of 80 to 90% of people that you've described just in this one podcast. When you were talking about the college scholarships, it's just that little hack that jumps you ahead of that many people.
Yeah, and I think it's really all about the way you look at things, because this wasn't a big revelation. What I thought to myself was, hey, I've run a blog in the past and I've gotten all of these really spammy pitches before. And these are from, basically automated spam. Anyone who runs a blog has probably seen this before. Hey, I saw your article on XYZ topic and I want to share a guest post with you, right? And you can totally tell that it's just complete spam, so that you're getting, let's say, hundreds of those types of emails a day. What can you do to stand out, right? And I've gotten pitches before where people sent me an email, they sent me a Facebook message, they sent me a LinkedIn message, and they sent me a tweet. And they weren't doing it to be annoying. The way they phrased it was that, hey, I know you get a lot of emails, so just in case you missed it, I wanted to remind you here on LinkedIn that I sent you an email, and here's the email just for your reference, right? Things like that. That's not super intrusive, but that right there off the bat obviously stands out.
And I want to go back to this point. This is a business. You have treated this website, it was a blog, but you always viewed it as a business, and you have grown it so significantly to the point now where you actually have a team of writers. But I think still, even now, when someone thinks about the rideshareguy.com and maybe they're reading an article, they still feel like they have that personal connection with you. So I'm curious, Medium doesn't have this. Huffington Post doesn't have this. I don't think of, what is it, Ariana Huffington when I read an article and post, but you do have that intimate connection on the Rideshare Guy. Have you thought about that at all? And is there something there?
Yeah, I actually, I think having that personal connection is more fun, to be honest. The reason why I do what I do is, obviously it's a business for me first and foremost. It's something I'm passionate about, but it's also something that helps people. And that's one of the things I've been so surprised by, is that people genuinely are very thankful for just creating content. And that was something that I never would have guessed. I get emails all the time from people that say, hey, your guides are so helpful. I just bought your book. It's amazing. I just read through the whole thing. I just listened to every one of your podcasts from episode number 1. I'm sure you guys have gotten similar emails or messages from your listeners. And I think that's a cool feeling to have. And so really in every aspect of my business, I've tried to maintain that personal connection. I do use a team of writers, but I can tell you that organically or sort of naturally, people are going to associate everything you do or, your writers do with you, for good and bad, right? When one of my writers does a really great post, sometimes people email in and say, Harry, great post. And I kind of have to say, oh, actually Christian on my team wrote this. But at the same time, when some of my authors have, maybe included some language that was a little offensive, which has happened a few times, kind of crass jokes, they say, Harry, why are you publishing this?
You're better than this, Harry. You're better than this.
I actually agree with you. We probably shouldn't have made that joke. We should stop trying to be funny because we're not funny. And, so it's good and bad, but I think that personal connection, what I tried to do. So from the get-go, again, what I tried to do to stand out was that I replied personally to every single email I got. And now we still do that to this day. Now I have one of the people on my team helps me reply to all those reader emails. But, looking back, I was thinking to myself, hey, I have friends who are bloggers. They have a couple 100,000 page views a month. They're making a full-time living. I email them sometimes. These guys are my friends and they don't email me back. What's up with that? I can only imagine what happens when their readers email them, right? Probably 95% of their readers are not getting emails. So I wanted to be in that position where, hey, all of these readers who email me, every single one of them is getting a response back, if they're asking a question or if they have a legitimate question. So that's something that I did from day one and still do to this day, although I sort of cheat now because I have a team or one person on my team that helps me. And, we do the same thing with YouTube comments. I also do YouTube Live. So we do a YouTube Live every single month. I do a YouTube Live every single month, and it's very consistent. We've been doing it for almost 2 years now. And I don't see anyone else in the rideshare space doing consistent YouTube Lives where, we're getting hundreds of thousands of page views a month. And so you wouldn't expect that this, I probably seem a lot more accessible than, your typical blogger, right? Because I'm doing YouTube Lives. I'm responding personally to emails. And frankly, I've met some people in real life and sometimes people email me and they feel like they know me. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I feel kind of bad because I don't know who this person is at all, but they have a really deep connection with me. But I think it's kind of, good and bad there.
So we've been talking about growing a side hustle, and you have gone so granular, and I absolutely appreciate it. But I almost want to slow down and realize that we may have missed this massive inflection point. You talked about how this was a 20 or 30 hours a week side hustle. At some point, this is just a full-time business. You're no longer working at Boeing anymore. Talk us through that inflection point. What's going on in your personal life that allows you to do that? Let's just dive in there.
Yeah, I worked for 6 years as an engineer, and I didn't have a ton of, I didn't live a super lavish lifestyle. It was pretty normal. So I was saving money. I was maxing out my 401k, contributing to an HSA and doing all, Roth IRA, doing all that good stuff since I had my solid personal finance background. And as my site, The Rideshare Guy, started to grow, I thought to myself, hey, this could be, a legitimate business opportunity here. I mean, I always started it because I thought it could be a good business, but I never really thought that it might actually replace my day job income and then some. And so it was kind of a cool, almost epiphany that at a certain point, I hadn't quite replaced my day job income, but I was making $1,000, $2,000 a month, and I was only spending 20 to 30 hours a week. And also I looked at sort of the growth numbers of the site, right? And it was really mainly traffic at this point. I wasn't focusing on monetization for the first year at all. I mean, I still partnered up with a couple companies here and there, but monetization really wasn't my focus for the first year. It was more about growing the site, growing the audience, and we were growing. We were probably growing 10 to 15% every single month, and I was spending 20 to 30 hours a week on it. And I thought to myself, hey, if I quit my day job, I'm going to be able to spend 40 to 60 hours a week on this project. And unless I'm really bad at blogging, I should see hopefully, an equivalent increase in the traffic. And so, I think that the writing was kind of on the wall. Personally, for me, I had money saved up. And, with engineering, honestly, this isn't a job, that's changing every single day. When I remember when I gave my boss my 2 weeks notice, and on my last day, he liked me, he said, hey, if you ever need another job, feel free to come back. So I definitely feel like I had that safety net there if I needed it. Although I was thinking to myself, there's no way in heck I'm coming back. But, definitely a lot of people were surprised when I left my job to go start this blog. But I didn't feel like it was that big of a risk. I knew other bloggers, that were making a full-time living, and I sort of knew the traffic levels they were at, and I could kind of see the path that I was on there. So frankly, I didn't see it as a big risk when I left, but I think, it wasn't a hasty decision either.
You said you knew other bloggers. What did networking look like for you? How did you have this kind of community of people to kind of lean on and get their opinion? How were those relationships developed?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I really owe it to a lot of the personal finance bloggers out there. Because, when I was first starting my site that I still own to this day, it's called Your Personal Finance Pro. I haven't posted on it in a while. And, I wouldn't.
Can we put it in the show notes?
I actually don't recommend. I don't want anyone listening to go read it. But
I really do want it. What's the link again?
yourpfpro.com.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you for that. And
you said it's still live. It's your fault, not mine.
It is still live. But I mean, I think with that site, I just feel that I learned a ton from that. And, I was doing a ton of the general promotion strategies and content creation and, creating guides and doing this and learning about online marketing. And I kind of like to say that was like my internship. That's where I honed my skills. I wasn't making much money or really doing it for the money at all. But one of the key aspects of that is I built a lot of relationships. And I kind of left this out. But when I was first growing my site, I reached out to all of my friends that were personal finance bloggers, all the people who, we'd been featuring each other in roundups and exchanging links and doing all that. And, I'd even met some of them in person because I've gone to FinCon, the personal finance bloggers conference, a couple times. And so I hit up all of my friends and asked them, hey, I'm driving for Uber and Lyft now. This is related to personal finance. Do you want a guest post on how much money you can make as an Uber or Lyft driver? And I even remember a lot of people said yes, because I'd built those good relationships. And one of them was Jay Money at budgetsaresexy.com. And I remember I wrote a guest post for him. It ended up being one of the top 10 posts on his site. I think this ties in well because you were talking about, I remember he was posting income reports at the time. And I think he was very transparent about the numbers on his blog and things like that. And so there were a few people like that I was kind of looking to as a guide. And I ended up in that first year, it was one of his top 10 posts. And obviously there were a bunch of links back to my site. And it was probably the top refer. I was getting hundreds of page views a day, hundreds of page views a week sometimes from his site and that one guest post I wrote. So definitely that network helped for, kind of the learning aspect, but also getting my site off the ground too. I was able to leverage that a lot.
Harry, I'm so torn because on the one side, I just want to go back to your personal story, but on the other side, I want to talk about these early days of what it looks like. And one thing that strikes me is that traffic isn't built for most people. It's not built because of that one viral moment that you write the most brilliant article of all time. It's because of these base hits, these small articles that end up over time getting more and more traction. It's just maybe 5 links, 5 clicks a day from one particular website that you had a guest post on, and maybe some Google traffic that popped up on something that you weren't even expecting, and maybe a very targeted, article that you wrote on something else. But it's like you build a portfolio that starts building your traffic over a series of weeks and months, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's about being smart, right? Like, I think it's a smart move to leverage, I'd built good relationships with these people. I didn't know that I was going to start an Uber or Lyft site someday, but, I built good relationships with them because I like them. And, just in general, I think having those relationships at some point, you want to cash in on them, right? Maybe that's not the best terminology to use, but, there's a point for building those relationships and you want to leverage everything that you have when you're starting a new business. I was looking at it from the perspective, hey, I'm going all in on this. I want to do everything and anything I can to make it work. And I think another good example was, I went out and there weren't a ton of rideshare blogs. I think I was probably one of, if not the only ones when I first started my site, but I did find a bunch of other people who were writing about, doing one-off posts about rideshare. And once people started, and I had a little bit of traction and I started seeing some rideshare blogs pop up. And so what I did was I went out and reached out to all of those other way smaller rideshare blogs. There were maybe 20, 25 at the time. And this is a few months in, but I went out and I asked if I could do a guest post on their site, or, we could do an exchange guest post or we could trade links or, link to each other a few times. And each one of those individual bloggers probably got way more out of it than me. But I also knew that I was reaching out to 20 or 25 of them. And in aggregate, I was going to get a lot out of it. So that's really kind of the way I was approaching things.
Harry, that's amazing. I mean, that is a story of networking and connections. And that's what we're always talking about here. These personal relationships, they just matter. Sometimes you don't know, hey, that one person at one of the other ride sharing blogs, you might be a partner with them down the road on some crazy project. You just simply don't know where it's going to be. It might start as a random link sharing, but who knows where it'll end up, right? And I think Jonathan summarized it perfectly there, saying, this is not about that one crazy home run of getting on the front page of the New York Times. It's about being consistent, building your network, building your content. You're providing value to people. That is how I view this entire blogging, podcasting world. It's providing value again and again, right? And getting people to come back.
Definitely agree. Although I will say getting on the front page of the New York Times will definitely help.
That is very true.
It's on my bucket list. There we go. Harry, thank you so much again for just being so willing to kind of share your secrets and just being so open with it. Like, this is actually what it looks like. This is, you didn't have to pay extra to get into some sort of level up course where we're then going to tell you the secrets behind the successful and non-successful bloggers. This is actually what it looks like. And it's just really cool to hear you be so willing to share this information. Now, there's going to be people listening to this that are genuinely interested in looking at Uber and Lyft as a side hustle and maybe have additional questions just for you and about your journey. I have two questions for you. One, specifically, we said that there are certain cities that are really more tuned in from this. And I know that you sent out a survey to people basically, aggregating who was making money doing Uber and Lyft. So I'm curious if you had like a list of the top 5 or top 10 cities that if someone listening to this happens to be one of those, their ears would perk up and say, ooh, I should check that out. That's my question number 1. And then 2, how should people connect with you?
Definitely the top cities sort of by population in the US are going to be some of the best cities to drive rideshare just because there's so many people in places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, San Diego, New York, even some of the cities in Texas, like Austin, Dallas. Definitely heard good things about all those cities. And then as far as how people can connect with me, I definitely would say that, the rideshareguy.com is my blog, and that's where we're posting 4 articles a week, tons of content up there. We also got a podcast, the Rideshare Guy podcast, which I think your listeners may actually like because I basically just interview people that I want to talk to on my podcast. And it's not always the nitty gritty of rideshare. For example, my next interview that's going live in a couple weeks will be with a guy who interviewed for a job at Lyft. He didn't get hired, but one of the positives of that, I've been trying to find someone who's interviewed at Uber or Lyft forever. The problem is if they get hired, they go sign an NDA and then can't come onto my podcast. And if they don't get hired, they're too embarrassed about it and they don't want to talk about it. But we just had a great conversation about his experience interviewing at Lyft and just generally applying for jobs and really a lot of the strategies that use. He reached out to me ahead of time, so you can sort of imagine he's the type of guy that does his homework and does his prep work. And that was a great interview. And then, I should probably also mention that I have a new book out, The Rideshare Guide, that is in stores, Amazon, available in whatever bookstores are still remaining these days, but it should be pretty much everywhere.
Coming to a Barnes & Noble near you.
Exactly.
All right. Now, on most shows, that would be the end of the episode. But on this show, we would love to give you the chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
I was born ready. Let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Harry, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
So I'd have to say my favorite blog is financialsamurai.com. And this is one of my buddies, but someone that I've known in the personal finance space for a long time, Sam. He's, I like to think of him as sort of a rich but thoughtful and frugal guy living in San Francisco. And, the economics sometimes of just living in places like LA, San Francisco, New York, it's just so different. The purchase price for a home and the potential salaries. And I think sometimes if you're not in those cities, it's hard just to justify like the pressures and all of that. And I think he does a good job wrapping that all up and, kind of encompassing everything that matters to me, business, sort of personal life and then also family.
I think, Brad, we're going to have to reach out to him.
Yeah, Harry's the second person now to list Financial Samurai as a favorite blog. So yeah, that's got to happen, I think.
Yeah, I think he'd be a great interview for you guys.
All right. Well, then question number 2, your favorite article of all time. Now, this can be one that you wrote or somebody else's.
Oh, one that I wrote. Well, there's a lot to choose from, but I wrote an article last year about driving for Uber and Lyft in 2017. And it's basically just a 3,000 or 4,000 word monster that, really kind of encompasses everything that I like, the strategy about driving for Uber and Lyft, the spreadsheets. I have this cool video that I created about, kind of it like follows me driving in Los Angeles. So you can actually see the route that I took on a map. So that's a cool one. And then a blog post on a different site is actually from the creator of the cartoon Dilbert. His name is Scott Adams. And he wrote a blog post, I think it was all the way back in 2007. and it was called The Day You Become a Better Writer. And I've had a couple smarter than me people recommend this to me, and a couple good writers. And basically, it's just a great quick blog post that kind of gives you some good insight into becoming a better writer, as the title imagines. Just some quick tips, kind of like what type of style and what you should think about. And I know some people actually read this every time before they sit down and write a blog post. And I don't go to that extreme, but I definitely like to read it every once in a while because I used to be a very, very terrible writer. I once failed a paper in college. I didn't even fail. They gave me no grade because it was so bad.
They said, I don't want to read this.
They literally wouldn't give me a grade. That's how bad it was. And I think blogging over time has just made me a little bit more cogent, and my arguments are a little more coherent now, and it's at least passable now for something that you might want to read.
And that's funny, Harry, because I have that article on a list of things to read. I think Tim Ferriss has mentioned it a number of times on his podcast. And nice. Scott Adams is a really deep thinker. I know I quote him a lot with the talent stack here at the Choose It By podcast. And he wrote a book called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And I highly recommend that to you and anybody out there listening.
I've read it.
Nice. Yeah, it's fantastic. All right, Harry, question number 3, your favorite life hack.
I thought about this for a while. My favorite life hack is what I call, I would say have no shame, because I think one of the common themes, we talked about on this podcast is there are times where, just because everyone else says that you shouldn't be doing something, or everyone else might look down upon an aerospace engineer driving for Uber and Lyft, sort of go out there and try it for yourself. Do things for the reasons, that are important to you. I think most people in life are doing it wrong. So most of the advice that you hear is probably also going to be wrong. So that's kind of my kind of hack, is really just, have no shame and do what you want to do.
I love the consistency. You have all of these incredible varied stories. It's hard to piece them together with a common thread, but I think this episode does that. I mean, you can kind of see this decision tree that leads you to this incredible outcome with what at first glance looks like random choices. And I love it, man. I'm a huge fan of your work.
I appreciate it. I think I'm learning about myself on this podcast. You guys are definitely asking some good and tough questions. I appreciate it.
Well, we'll bring out the therapist couch for next season. All right. Question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
This actually happened when I was working as an engineer for my first company called Goodrich Aerostructures down in San Diego. And they offered what's called an employee stock purchase plan, or ESPP, which I had no idea what this was at the start. And, I think I started contributing a few $100s here and there. And once I actually realized what it was, I maxed that thing out and put $10,000 or $20,000 a year in it every year, because it actually gave you, sort of the lower stock price either at the beginning or end of a 6 or 12-month period. And it was basically kind of like free money, that there was sort of like, it looked like there was some risk on the surface, but once you started to think about it, it was like actually a very good deal. And I wish I would have maxed that out earlier, because I would have made a few extra dollars at the beginning there.
Yeah, that is a great tip. And so many people have access to the ESPP, especially if you work for a large corporation. You probably have this baked in, and it is potentially up to 15% free money on your contributions. It's really incredible once you look into the math.
All right, Harry, question number 5, the advice you would give your younger self.
Yeah, I think the advice that I would give my younger self is just to try new things, try everything. I think that's a little bit cheesy, but kind of my twist on it is that in all aspects of life, I think that, what I found, obviously in business, I've done a lot of that, but I think also just in your personal life, even for me with food, I love food. And this is kind of a funny story, but, even for me, growing up, there were a lot of foods like mushrooms and salmon and all these things that I didn't like, and coffee. And just the more I tried it, the more I ate it, the more I liked it. And now I pretty much like everything. So I think that, there are reasons why a lot of people like certain things, and, just continue trying new things and see what fits for you and what doesn't. But, don't be afraid to try it at least a few times.
I had tofu for the first time in my entire life last week. Didn't exactly change my world, but I did have it. I'm testing this theory right now.
Eat it like 5 more times, and try it different styles and different places, and I bet you'll start to like it.
There you go. All right, now we do have a bonus question for you. To be honest with you, a lot of the questions that and a lot of the conversations that we have on the show talk about things that you didn't buy, talk about frugality, but all of us make purchases based on value. And what we want to know is, what is the purchase that you made over the past 12 months that brought the most value to your life?
So I'd have to say that it was actually a very recent purchase. I bought a couple Nest outdoor cams and a Nest doorbell. And basically these are video cameras that, you download an app on your phone and you can set up motion alerts and people alerts and all this cool stuff. And, I like the technology side of it, but I also just like, my wife and I recently had a baby boy who's now 4.5 months old. And I feel like it just gives me that added extra layer of security. I don't know that, I'm going to look at my phone, see someone breaking in and call the cops. I doubt that will ever, that would ever actually work out in reality.
Well, not if they see you have the Nest. They're running away, man.
Exactly. I'm hoping that, it's a deterrent. And I think it's just kind of a combination of a cool technology and something that, gives me peace of mind. And that's what I'm looking for with a young baby in the house.
I wonder if anybody has locked down the smart thermostat guy, because it could still be out there.
So I've also got a Nest thermostat. So right now I'm an all Nest house and I'm very addicted to it. I highly recommend their products.
TheNestGuy.com. It just has a nice ring to it. Oh, come on, guys. Give me one courtesy laugh. Give me something.
I'm thinking trademark violation.
I'm registering it right now.
Oh, man. Harry, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a total blast.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys having me on. And hopefully, I've inspired some of your listeners to either sign up to drive with Uber or to quit their job and start a blog about something they love, once they've gotten some traction at least.
All right, Brad, I get it, dude. I am so blown away by everything that Harry has done up to this point and just these little steps that put in place that other people probably just take for granted. They write it off as, oh, this one guy just got lucky and that's not replicable. It is absolutely replicable, but most people aren't willing to look at the problem a little bit differently. And that's exactly what he did. I am just thrilled by this conversation.
Yeah. And he looked at the problem differently almost in every aspect of his life. And that is really, really rare and very cool. So yeah, I told you this was going to be just jam packed with actionable tips and just cool little rethinks on life and business. And yeah, Harry definitely brought it. So that was fantastic.
All right, if you've been getting value from the show, if you got value from today's episode, just take 1 second, press the subscribe button on the platform you're listening to this on. It just lets the providers know you're getting value from the show and you want to be here when we produce additional episodes. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at ChooseFI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.